production is a pretty encompassing word of a lot of different talents and interests. And so we have an incredible variety of talents on our panel. The panelists will introduce themselves, and then we will jump right into conversation with any questions or topics you all would like to discuss. So Kathy, take it away.
Hi, everyone. I see some names, but I don't see a lot of faces. So I'm going to reiterate what Angela said and invite you to, be part of it. It's an informal discussion, and it's nice to see who we're talking to. Anyway, my name's Kathy Kaufmann. I am a freelance lighting designer. I've been lighting productions for over 30 years. I'm a resident designer at the Dance Space Project at St. Mark's Church in New York City. I'm New York City based. I also have taught at NYU, and I taught at Sarah Lawrence for the past 7 years. And I was a production manager at The Kitchen, which is a New York City venue, as well as a production manager for the River to River Festival. And I work with mainly dance companies. Among them are the Bang Group, Efrat Asheri, Dorrance Dance, Joanna Kotza. I mainly do downtown New York City dance companies, although I've also production managed at Carnegie Hall for Meredith Monk and light for Echo and Coma, very site specifically. I've traveled around the world. I'm really fortunate for having done that and seen a lot of it on tour. And currently I am going back and forth between New York City and Connecticut, where I'm fortunate to have a second home to be during this pandemic time, because being in the city is very challenging, and trying to lessen the load on the city people. And that's sort of me in a nutshell. Thanks.
So my name is Carlos Soto, and I'm a scenic and costume designer, sometime director, sometime performer, based in New York City. And I've been in New York City for now a year, which is probably the longest I've spent in one place in several years. And I work mostly internationally. For the last 23 years, I've been working closely with the director, Robert Wilson, and for the last 5 with Solange Knowles, a songwriter and a musician, on several live and filmed projects. And I work primarily in sort of the interspace between opera and new music, and some dance, and musical theater. And that's me.
I'm G. Clausen. I'm a sound designer, composer, and music producer. I live in Charlotte. I'm also faculty at University of North Carolina School of the Arts. I do theatrical sound design, film sound design, produce music, write music, compose music, all of the above. Mainly lately, I've been doing a lot of theatrical sound design, since that's what my MFA is in. But before that, I was an independent hip hop artist. And so I came to theater kind of from a sideways direction. I was doing that for 20 years before I found out about theatrical sound design.
Anybody have any questions they want to pose right off the bat? All right, so can you guys go around and just tell us about the last project you were working on? Where were you? What was your role in it? And what was the most interesting part of the last project you did? Pre-COVID, I guess, or during COVID, doesn't matter.
Pre-COVID, I can't even remember pre-COVID. Pre-COVID, I think all I remember about pre-COVID is I had like 4 shows got canceled.
Yeah.
So that's what I mainly remember. I still got paid for one of them, which was awesome. They looked out. But since the pandemic, actually, like right before we had to adjust how we were going to teach. So during our spring break at the School of the Arts is when the determination was made that we would not meet in person for classes when they got back from spring break. And we told our students before we let them go to get most of their stuff because we thought that that would be a possibility. And I was actually working at the Stevens Center downtown Winston-Salem, getting ready, helping to load in for an opera.
Oh, wow.
So we did a whole load in, right? And then it got canceled. Like
Yeah.
everyone was working, everyone scrambling, getting the stuff loaded in, running all the cables, doing all the programming. And then like, and like that day, I think it was the day after you could see footage of in Italy of how bad this thing was looking. And while we were doing our stuff, I was like, I don't even know if we should be doing this. You know, it probably won't happen. And our program director was the director of the sound design program at the school was actually, he came in a little bit later because it was his system design. We had a whole conversation about it. And then literally the next day they were like, you know, it's over. So, you know, that was the last thing before COVID for me. Since COVID, I've done one theatrical production that was filmed. We just wrapped last night. So they filmed for 2 days, Thursday and Friday. And so my design process was a little bit different for that because we're recording mic'd actors just for post-production, like not for sound reinforcement. The sound design, although I was using QLab, is kind of just a reference because we're recording 2 tracks of it to Pro Tools while we're recording the actors' dialogue. And then in post-production, we're gonna make it sound like it's supposed to sound. But it's interesting because I had to compose for that show as well. The actors sing. And when you're playing the sound in the house for recording for film, you have to bring the level down to a point where it's kind of barely audible for the actors so it won't bleed into their microphones. And so they had to like learn the songs and be in time without actually being able to hear it at full show volume while we were recording. So that was really interesting, you know, and it was something like we had talked about from the beginning, and I kept telling the director over and over, the actors, like, they're not gonna be able to hear themselves. I just want you to know, they're not gonna be able to hear these sound effects. I just want you to know. And I don't think it registered until Wednesday, which was the first day that we dropped everything 9 dB. And like, wait a minute, where's the sound? I was like, yeah, that's, you know, that's what we've been saying this whole time. And really, like, you know, it's been a sharp learning curve for people who have only done theater.
Yeah.
As far as how can we do these other things, because there are people live streaming, there are people filming, doing all these other things, and you kind of have to adjust and get out of your comfort zone in order for these things to happen. So that literally, we wrapped that at the Children's Theater Charlotte last night. So that's the last thing that I did.
Wow.
Want me to go? I was on the road last February, and I came back into the city, into New York City. I had a little show that was going to be performing, and I was going to be there, I guess, the weekend of March 15th or whenever they shut down the city. But it was very small. It was like in a loft. And so we still performed, and I was very nervous. I was not comfortable with it. The city was starting to shut down, and I started to feel, you know, we're obsessively hand washing. Yeah. I had rented some lights. I just could not wait to finish the show, take some things down and get them back to the rental house and get out of Dodge because they were closing the city down. And recently, actually, I found my boarding pass, and I can't believe that I was on a plane. It feels years ago. And then after that, I was teaching remotely, which was very challenging because I was teaching mainly dance students, but we do production work and they actually do their own designs. They light their fellow students' works. And it was in the spring, so it was the time of year where it all culminates in actual performances. But of course, we were not able to do that. So we did a lot of Zooming and a lot of theoretical work. We were asking people to try and be creative from home, using lights that they had. And virtually everybody turned into a filmmaker. That was the big takeaway from that. And we realized how hard it is to they could take some of the concepts that they had learned in the class and apply them to what they were doing at home, but you certainly couldn't get effects. And they had been working on these pieces for months. So to the point where they even had some preliminary cues in the board in the theater, but then suddenly we were literally from California to Florida, all across, the country, zooming in, and it was very challenging. And, certainly for lighting, that particular class, it's so hands-on that we really missed that. Then over the summer, I just haven't had, there's been no production work, so I haven't done anything. And then in December, I was fortunate enough to light a piece that we made also into a dance film, and the protocols were very, very strict. The company, it was Doran Stance, they had come out of a 2-week residency bubble at Jacob's Pillow. So they were all very, they had taken good emergency protocols. And I was one of the outside people, but I was still nervous. I didn't want to be the one to get everybody sick. But I was impressed at how seriously everybody took it, and then how we were still able to be creative. They found a theater that would let us, use their equipment, and did a little load in and set levels. And we had a videographer, and we took a day to tech things. And then, we shot for a day. And the result was, once again, a dance film, but it was pretty great. And I was so grateful to even have that kind of work. And now moving ahead, it's very tough to be a lighting designer at this point, unless you're doing an outside gig at night. Because everyone's doing outside work, but there's that sun, and
yeah,
it's very hard to compete with that. So I've tried to remind people that not only am I a lighting designer, but I'm a production manager, and I can stage manage too. So I'm hoping that for summer festivals, if there's not an opportunity to light something, that I can kind of go back to, stage managing or production managing and just being on site as a site manager. But I've sort of moved away from that in the last 10 years. I've been very lucky to be just a freelance lighting designer. And I had to say to my production manager, hey, don't forget, I know how to do this too, because I'm kind of, I think for, lighting designers, we're not really gonna, unless we're doing film stuff, we're not doing live things until, at least in New York City, the fall, I would expect. I'm hoping that smaller venues will be a little more liberal and comfortable with smaller audiences and, spacing protocols. But so far, I was invited to do something, and I even felt nervous being in such a small space, even with 8 dancers. You don't know where anybody's been. And even though everyone's like, I'm fine.
Yeah.
2 weeks later, maybe they weren't fine. So I know that if I, as a creator, am feeling that, I'm assuming that audiences will too. And I think it's going to be hard to get them back into venues, So that is, anyway, Carlos hit it.
The last thing I worked on actually premiered a year ago last week in Salzburg as part of the Mozart Week. I worked on a staging of Handel's Messiah, reworked by Mozart, that Robert Wilson staged and designed, with Mark Minkowski and the Musiciens du Louvre performing. which was then supposed to go to the Salzburg Festival during the summer, which didn't happen, was then postponed to next year. It's not going to happen because there's no budget. In the middle of rehearsal, our lighting designer took a 3-day trip to Shanghai to inspect a lighting instrument because he was designing some fashion event there, and came back and he goes, oh, everybody's in China's talking about this thing that's going around. But that, we kind of laughed it off, and we were like, oh, it's just another flu. And then came back to New York and was starting to prepare one production with Peter Sellers that was going to premiere in Paris in March. And then Sunday in the Park with George at LA Phil, which was a pain in the ass because they hadn't confirmed a cast and never actually confirmed a cast until they canceled. And then a bunch of other things that were all going to kind of car crash together. And so I think everything shutting down in the spring was kind of a relief for a second, because didn't have to go through all that stuff. But then now having all this extended time off where I haven't been working on anything except one production that hasn't been canceled yet, that's premiering in October in Houston at the Opera. I was thinking, like, God, I was working on a lot of projects where I was just designing under duress, like producers that, staged productions have become such a kind of added value for a lot of venues that don't normally stage things, like the LA Phil, like museums, like other institutions that are not repertory houses or festival houses, but that don't understand how productions happen, so that think that you can design a show in a matter of a week and have everything built in 2 weeks, and then expect it to be like a fully staged thing. But then they go like, oh, but we don't have any money either. And like, don't go to Chanel on a Kmart budget. Like, stick to your strengths, and if you want to expand, maybe consult with some people that do it. So I'm hoping that, among the other things that institutions have to fix, timing and scheduling is one of those. And then, like the dreaded, oh God, I've heard it so many times and now I'm forgetting. The clause where they can cancel your contract if something like a pandemic happens.
Act of God.
Force majeure.
Force majeure, yeah.
They love that one. So yeah, that's my gripe.
Well, that leads me, if you guys don't mind, I have a quick question based off of what you said. Something I've been thinking about a lot is about the people who have been either freelancing, or I guess mostly freelancing, and are pivoting into more permanent type positions, maybe outside of the arts field, if those are available. And just been thinking about how the environment and the ecology is going to change, like when things go back to normal or what have you, and like who's going to be like left in that field and what that's going to look like. And I was just wondering if you guys had any thoughts about that or reflections on how the community has like changed during your career.
Well, I know that, there are freelancers every year that get jaded and go into like permanent jobs where they get health insurance, and other benefits, because it is like, I don't, my calendar doesn't fill out, 3 years at a time. It's a year at a time. And usually like, the calendar is empty, and then May and June, you get inundated with like all the offers, you know what I mean? And then, so like, there's a period where like, man, I don't have anything on my calendar. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? What am I going to do? And even I've like looked for those regular jobs, like trying to find security, because that part is always terrifying. Like I have nothing, but then like May and June, by June, I'm turning stuff down because I don't have like stuff is overlapping, and I'm saying I can't do it, but hire such and such, and give them a recommendation. But there are other people who have transitioned into other things before COVID, because it's not stable, because you kind of don't know what's going to happen, and then there are a couple students, former students of mine who during COVID were able to get full-time gigs in New York doing something completely different. So I think that's something that has happened before COVID, because it's a tumultuous thing being a freelancer. There's nothing guaranteed. You're always hustling. You're always dreading the empty calendar, even though it fills up. Like, it's still like every year it's the same thing. It's like, oh, I don't have anything, and then boom, I have everything. But it's still like, it's frightening. But there are skills from some design professions that transfer well. But I think, our greatest skill is collaboration, which should be needed by every institution. How to work with others and lead teams, you know what I mean? But it's hard to like doctor your resume or CV to be that thing, you know what I mean? Like, it is difficult, because we could do a lot of things, but those institutions don't necessarily see our skill set as being beneficial to them because it's so foreign to them.
So what does that say about you guys that stayed? That you stuck in there?
There have been, just this past week, a company that I work with, I think hopefully we're going to have an opportunity to do a live stream from the Joys, and the person who had production managed it the last time we were there has relocated to San Antonio, and then the choreographer was saying, how about this other person? And I was like, they've left the city too. So that is something that I'm seeing, is that a lot of people who kind of stuck it out for the first 6 or 8 months are thinking, it's just too hard. I can go to a different part of the country where it's more, where it's cheaper to live, and I'm not stuck in an apartment. And so that's just 2 people randomly just within 1 week that I've heard about, and I haven't even really checked in. Most of my friends, the freelance people, I don't really know what they're doing. People who are attached to an organization are fine. They're working from home. Occasionally they'll go in, but a lot of people are being furloughed or their hours are being cut. And, one thing that happens when you're a freelancer is you learn to put some money aside for the lean times, because they happen. And that's helped, I think, some people. But I think in New York, we'll see I think first there'll be a dearth, and then there'll be a rush, because people will be like, great, I can get a job there. Everybody needs people. And the moment fashion starts up again, and, some of the perennial things, we'll start to see the next crop of kids come in, and also the rents are a little lower now. So it's a great time once work starts happening. Certainly filming is happening in New York. I see it. I see the trucks, and I see them at Chelsea Piers. Production is happening, television production and film production. But I'm not seeing I wish people were using the theaters more to do some live streaming and make films, but I'm not seeing a lot of that, at least in my field. What about you, Carlos? I'm curious, of your freelance friends.
Well, one collaborator of mine went to quarantine in Vermont last March and decided he was going to buy a house in Vermont and leave his apartment in Brooklyn. And he was already having issues with his roommate, who's a composer that he works with, and he's a partner in his opera company. So they just decided to work together, but not live together. But beyond that, all my designer friends, I think because we don't necessarily have to physically be someplace for our work to be built. It's a little bit different, you know. It's not so hands-on. It is at a certain point, but you know, the work can start without us. So I remained in New York because I mean, I'm not going to go anywhere. I love New York, and I'm kind of morbidly fascinated by how empty and wonderful New York is right now. You know, it feels like it's being reclaimed, and it feels like a little village. And I sort of like don't want it to ever like get overpopulated again. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've also sort of just become a hermit over the last year because I haven't been doing anything, and I've just been talking to like the same 3 people, which are just, you know, the same collaborators I always work with, who are like, so this thing, we're going to move it, and are you now free this time? And I'm like, yeah, sure. I have nothing on the calendar. So it's been sort of nice to kind of, well, I don't know. Yeah, it's weird, but.
Yeah, it's funny. In the beginning,
really,
you check in with everybody and how's everybody doing and what's going on. And then I even had design meetings, big design Zoom meetings, because everyone thought, oh yeah, you know, last September, we're going to do something. And then those dates would get pushed back. I mean, Carlos, similar to you, I had one of those weeks where everything was being scheduled for September and October. I thought, oh, this is going to be great. I'm going to be on the road. I'm doing shows in New York. I thought, if this all really happens, I'm in trouble. But then, of course, none of it happened. It all went away. And then I was even scheduled for something, I think it was going to be this coming in February. And when they hired me, they were like, okay, this may be a pretend show, but we're hoping. But then the venue canceled. I think some venues are getting very nervous about having patrons. So,
Yeah.
And now I feel like this is my big worry, that I'm starting to lose touch with my regular collaborators, and that we're kind of getting out of practice. And a lot of people, or some of the companies that I work with, do encourage regular meetings. Like we have regular company meetings, and that's incredibly helpful, just to keep track of what people are doing, what opportunities are there. And then also just in terms of information of, you know, oh, this PPP loan is available, or or the Actors Fund was, I think, also had some money that they were giving away, and how do you apply for it? And what do you need to qualify? And that's been very helpful. I wish more companies, you know, could do, as small companies could do that, because it's so helpful.
Yeah.
So I saw it. Oh, okay. I was just reading the chat.
Keep your camera on, Kathy. What do you think, you kind of touched on it, how like even in trying to do little projects here and there, you're still not quite comfortable. What do you think it's going to look like when we quote unquote start opening up? Because I mean, I think it's clear now that everybody's not going to get a magic vaccination all at once, which is kind of like what people were thinking in October. Like, what do you think will come back first? Is it like immersive small audience things? Are we going to be with live streaming for a lot longer than we want to? What do you guys foresee?
I don't see live streaming going away. I think it will probably be embraced more because it's a revenue stream that will reach more people. And, you know, I think virtual reality and immersion productions will become more commonplace. We're figuring all that out now. Like, we're doing all this experimental stuff just to have things, you know, to have productions. But I think it will be embraced because that technology isn't going away. It's gonna, more consumers will have it. You know, it'll be like the new stereo. You know what I mean? And I think that a lot of venues and theater companies are addressing things that haven't been addressed in the past, because now is the time, like, for people to point out problems and
Yeah.
say, what have you been doing to solve it? I mean, we have huge issues with lack of diversity in designers
Yeah.
of all disciplines, you know, in venues.
Mhm.
We have problems with theater not really being accepting of a lot of people for various reasons. It's not very accommodating, you know, for most people. Um, I think that all of those issues, you know, are there. There's a movement to fix them. And so, along with, you know, physical differences in these spaces, because, you know, our industry can't get shut down like this again. So they're going to have to figure out a way to design and redesign venues to accommodate social distancing. For instance, to have like HVAC systems with UV, you know, with UV systems, to have proper ventilation, you know, to be cleaned on a regular basis. So when you go up in the grid, there's not like 8 years of dust and skin, dead skin. You know what I mean? So along with like the physical things, there's also like cultural
Yeah.
changes happening that I think will become very apparent as soon as things start opening up, because they're, you know, these companies are realizing like it'll be the death of theater if they don't address these issues. The average age of theater goers is somewhere between like 55 and 62,
Yeah.
right? And white, like overwhelmingly white. This is one of the whitest industries that exists. And in order for it to continue and thrive in the future, they are going to have to address these things. So I do see these conversations taking place. There are like regular weekly meetings, you know, with designers of all kinds, you know, trying to address these issues. And I've seen, you know, certain theatrical companies and venues actually shake their boards up because they realize like some of the people giving them money are antithetical to this new world. You know, I recently, like a board member and donor to Trinity Rep got dismissed and was told not to leave money in her will for Trinity Rep because of you know, her views on race. You know what I mean? So like this hard stuff is happening while nothing is up. So there's drama happening, right? But it's not on stage. It's happening behind stage. And ultimately, I think the outcome will be good and we'll have better product, right? We'll have more inclusive audiences, which means, you know, a wider range of stories,
Yeah.
which I love, you know, which we kind of are missing. So that's kind of what I see.
That's really interesting about Trinity Rep. I mean, that's great, because that's really hard to turn down the money.
Yeah.
And that's where it's going to make a difference. I know certainly that the organizations that I'm involved with are, I mean, I feel very fortunate. Dance Space Project is pretty inclusive and diverse, but they're extremely serious about like continuing that mission. That is their mission. And I'm seeing a lot of other groups in New York sitting down and having the discussions, and finally, and maybe that's one of the nice things of the pandemic, is that there's a little time to sit and talk about it and make a plan. In the summer, I was really nervous about what I saw was a lot of knee-jerk reaction, you know, where everybody started to just put out this material, like seemingly without really sitting with it and thinking and making a real cohesive plan. And now I'm seeing more of that, like coming across, you know, in emails or mission statements of different groups. And I know certainly for myself, for people who are watching this, G and Carlos and I, you know, spoke once before. I know I'm interested in getting kids of color in the pipeline early in terms of education, technical theater education, and people are willing to listen to me that never would have heard that before, or they would have said like, oh yeah, that's great, all kids. But there's a specific, you know, a mission for this. And I know some of the companies that I work with, because I work with a lot of mixed race companies, they're like, this is great, because I go on tour with people and they're like the stagehands, and I'm married to, you know, stagehand, but it's a lot of old white stagehands, and it's, you know, it does not have to be that way, but you got to start somewhere. So certainly it occurred to me actually before this summer, because I was looking for ways to do educational stuff. And I was really heartened by the positive reception that I was hearing from people who were giving it the time, or giving me the time to even explain what I wanted to do, and giving me the time to try and create a curriculum, you know, for like middle schoolers or something, that I don't think would have been possible a year ago. And maybe I wouldn't have had the time to even think about it. You know, I would have just said, oh, this would be great to do sometime, but an upside of the pandemic is hours to sit and think about, okay, like what kids, what age, you know, how can we draw them in? And so that has been a positive thing. And then what you're saying about the physical adaptations of the theaters, I think, you know, this is probably not our last pandemic, and I think we'll know how to go back into certain things, you know, live streaming, a lot of remote stuff. And maybe I just have to light more for video and learn that. But it's also not so easy when you're in your home, you know, like if I was in a studio, I would feel very differently if I could have that. But even those working conditions, you know, they say are not safe. I mean, I felt like once I was in the place, you know, everybody was masked. I felt fine. You know, probably we're a little too cavalier, letting our guards down. And,
Yeah.
you know, if you know your people well, you want to hug them or something like that. You're like, you can't, but you forget, you know, or you get too close. But I think that we'll be able to, I don't think anything will be exclusive. I think what will happen is there'll be more. You know, it's like G was saying, like there'll be, you know, VR. VR is the real thing. That's going to happen. And the production elements for it will get better and better and better. So should I be learning that? I don't know. Should I be, you know, like, well, you know, maybe, you know what, if I was 25, yeah, because that's going to be something that you can do. It's hard for me now. Like I wonder about myself, like, what kind of opportunity do I even have to learn something like that? But I think that that'll be yet another thing we can do. I mean, who thought that this would be the golden age of television these years, right? And it's not just because of the pandemic. There's just so much product, and we all watch it, you know, because it's there. So I think VR will be another thing, live streaming. Yet, in the end, we all really like to come together as humans and be in that space. And I fear that we're forgetting it a little. Like that feeling of all being together in the room and having that thrill of live theater. I hope that that people don't lose their taste for it. I mean, I think we're human, and in the end, we want that, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we are like, everyone is craving that live thing, whether it's theater or like going to a concert or like something like that. But like to me, it still is gonna be like frightening to see that many people in one place. You know what I'm saying? Like initially, that's the thing. Like initially getting over like, wait a minute, there's 200 people in this space.
Yeah.
You know, that's like, I don't. I mean, I think parts of how we are living our lives during this pandemic will still remain.
Mm.
You know, because of the residual effect, right? Because it won't just, like, this experience is not just gonna leave our memory. You know what I mean? Like, we're still gonna have it. So, you know, our venue's going to be physically different. I think they will. I think they will be different. You know, how do you think about seating people? For outdoor concerts, you know, you saw before everything got canceled, right? People were coming up with ideas of having like pods or platforms for like people that come together and you space them out on the lawn, right? I think that ideas like that might become the norm, right? Spacing people out in theaters in pods might become the norm, because this won't be the last pandemic. And if we
all boxes
yeah, I mean,
for everyone.
yeah, I don't know about that, but you know, some innovation, some new idea of how to do this, because you know, when the next pandemic happens, which it will, like we don't know when it will happen. It could be another 100 years. It could be like in 3 years. We don't know, but we can't just be like, no more theater again. Yeah, you know what I mean, or no more concerts again. So you know, innovation and engineering have to take precedence in order to come up with clever ideas and ingenious ideas in order for us to continue doing what we're doing. You know, because we can't just sit around like for another 2 years the next time this happens. You know, otherwise, like the industry would just be dead. Like, why would it ever come back if this happens? Like, when this happens again and we don't make any physical adjustments, there will be no more live anything, because everyone like us will be like, I have to find something else to do for a living. You know what I mean? Like, I cannot stay in this for another 2 years. Right. So it's like the practical idea of it, you know, and just for like self-preservation, we have to come up with new ideas about how these spaces actually exist and what they look like and what does an audience look like. I don't know.
I think one offshoot also of what's happening is that I think it would be great to see more new work come out after, and maybe new genres, you know, in tandem with these new spaces, but really new work. Because like, you know, how many more times can you see another Pippin or another whatever? Like, nobody cares anymore. You know, the audience that does isn't going to be alive for much longer, right? But they're also, you know, it to make space for new stories and new work, I think is my hope. Because I also just get tired of like designing things where I had to think about like, okay, it's been done a million times, how to make it new again. You know, it's
Do you think that
and
new
I've been lucky
spaces?
just to,
sorry.
No, I was just going to say that I've been lucky almost my entire career to only do new creations. So I'm like completely disused to doing adaptations of things. So it's yeah.
Do you think anybody will build a venue or a new style venue that starts to think that way? Like that is almost like the opposite of a flexible space, something that's like where you go into smaller pod rooms, and that the material that gets created is adapted to that space, almost like a zillion site-specific things as a new piece. And you know, I think it's kind of interesting to imagine how things will morph. I mean, certainly, you know, there's been this immersive theater thing for the last, whatever, 10, 15, I mean, it's much older than that, but certainly, you know, commercially viable for the last 15 years. Like right now, I wouldn't want to go see Sleep No More and be in that type of environment. But I might if I knew that I could travel with my pod, you know, although can that be cost effective?
Right. That was my question, is does that mean the end of big tours? And like, you know, Broadway is only viable if you can get 10,000 people in one room for 2 hours. So is it going to be more small theater, new work based, like what Carlos was saying?
I saw a new design for a venue yesterday. I forgot what I was reading, but there's a company that's designing they call it vertical venue, like a vertical venue space.
Yeah.
So yeah. So yeah, I think there are going to be new designs, right? And then our value as designers increases, right? Because with all of these special venues, if your stuff gets remounted or goes on tour, you're going to have to design it in a way that is adaptable, right, to all these different formats, which you know, then maybe we'll start getting paid what we're worth, you know, at that point. But yeah, I mean, we will have to like think of new ways of designing for whatever this is going to be, because 10,000 people in a space like that doesn't sound inviting to me right now.
No.
Yet this summer, what was happening was like all these raves.
Oh yeah, because the underground economy still exists no matter what, right? So yeah, I was telling my students before we even canceled classes, I was like, there's not going to be any work, you know, unless like people are just doing illegal parties, you know, and that's pretty much what happened, you know, because that money is going to flow regardless, you know, no matter what. If something's outlawed, there's going to be a way for people to still consume that. So yeah.
I mean, one venue, like you were talking about, the vertical venue, which I think was being developed for cinema to like reduce the footprint of a screening room so that you could actually have more screening rooms in a building, because it would have an enormous screen and then it's just like an apartment building of seat boxes, of like smaller groupings of people next to each other and on top of each other with increased airflow and better sight lines. But MSG is also building a venue in Las Vegas at the Venetian called the Sphere, which is like it's a 17 to 20,000 seat venue that's modular, so everything can be changed around. But it's essentially not quite 360 because the seating slopes like a traditional theater, but you have essentially a sphere that's a projection surface that's, I don't know how many thousands of feet of pixels. And they're really trying to, you know, they're in the test phases right now and sort of working with designers to figure out how the technology can be used, because they developed a technology for material that doesn't exist. And to figure out how it can lend itself to new kind of storytelling so that it isn't just, I mean, obviously they want to rent it out for like TED Talks and planetarium shit, but to create new narrative works in ways that have not been explored before. So it's expanded cinema, but there's also space for live performance. And it's, you know, it's like the Armory in New York City, which is a space that's large enough that you don't have to have the 20,000 people in there. You know, you can have people spaced out. You can arrange the seating for maximum flow of bodies to protect audience members, but also staff and performers and everybody. But I think, yeah, on one side, having designers redesign productions to go into these new spaces, but also having designers figure out how to use these spaces. Yeah.
That's interesting. One of the shows that got canceled that I was supposed to do was at High Point University at their planetarium. We were already trying to design a show for that, and for sound design specifically. Like, I I was developing 2 separate sound designs for one space. So like 2 sets of people would be getting a different experience. You know what I mean? In that space. And there was like a lot of projection and lighting design that was happening. I don't know what the set was going to be because we never got, like, we didn't get too far, right, before it got canceled. But the idea of using a space like that for a theatrical production was pretty fresh and new, right? And so I'm excited about all that stuff, like all the new ways and new spaces that we can use.
I was not kind of kidding about like opera boxes. And in some ways, that's what the vertical thing is. And it's a bit of a throwback where everybody is back in their opera box seating to view something. And I wonder if we'll actually need really huge footprints, almost like museums where people travel from, a site to site within the big space. Like if they're going to reconfigure the big sphere in Las Vegas for live theater, it can happen. It's like more vignette-y, I think. Humans are funny. When there's constrictions, they get to be their most creative. So I think it'll be interesting to see what people come up with having those parameters. It's kind of wonderful. I can't wait to see it.
Yeah, I agree.
Be part of it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, without constraint, there really is no creativity because there's too many options.
It's paralyzing. Yeah. I don't like it when it's like, you can do whatever you want. I'm like, no, don't tell me that.
I mean, the best design is problem solving, right?
Yeah.
It's like
that's all we do.
I had this kind of like contention with the description of the thing, which was like, we're the people that fill the space. And I'm like, no, we're the people that make it legible.
Nice.
It's not, you don't have to fill it up.
Yeah, I solve the problem of the room, sonically. Yeah. That's what I do. You solve the problem of how do I create a practical, right, usable set design that looks good. You know what I mean? Yeah. That actors can feel comfortable on. And then how do I fill this space with lighting that
doesn't get in everyone's eyes.
Doesn't get in their eyes. It also lights everyone, right? Like if you have dark-skinned actors and light-skinned actors on the same stage, like how can you make them look all good? Like we're constantly solving problems. Like we're just engineers. You know what I mean? That's all we do. Sometimes we're solving problems that directors have no clue. Like they have no clue that it's going to be a problem, and we try not to say no as much as possible, right? And so we're constantly like, how can I make this work? How can I make this work? But yeah, I think you're right, Carlos.
Well, we're getting close to wrapping up. Does anybody have any final questions they want to pose to our panel of facilitators?
I guess I would just ask y'all, if nobody else wants to go ahead and jump in, where you think you would be if maybe you were starting out in your career during this time, what you would advise people to like focus on or develop or, ruminate in while we have this space that's not just like booking job after job after job. Like what do you advise people to like ground in their practice at like an early stage in their career, maybe?
I think one of my biggest assets is that I didn't start in theater. And so my approach to sound and audio comes from a more holistic place, I guess is how I describe it. Because I'm a studio engineer, a music producer and an artist and a musician. I was all of that before I went to grad school for theatrical sound design. And I bring that to my students. Like I teach my students now, like how to record and mix, and how to make this stuff sound good. And now we are introducing like video game sound design and virtual reality and all these other things, these other elements of sound design. And it helps the overall product, because if you understand how these tools and concepts and works, you can apply it to all these things, right? And not get pigeonholed. And it creates, I think, a better work product, but it also makes you more marketable, right? Because it's not just one thing that you do. So for me, like for sound, anyone interested in sound design, like learn as much as you can about all aspects of sound and audio. Because it will help you. Like it won't hurt you. It will not hurt you. It will actually help you. It will help how you hear things. It will help how you apply processing. You figure out, I figured out like halfway through my first semester of grad school, that everything that I knew up to that point for theater and sound reinforcement, it was just the inverse. And once I figured out that this live stuff is just the inverse of the studio stuff, then I was able to turn everything inside out that I already knew and apply it to theater in a way that was new to even my instructors, because they just came from theater, right? And so when I was like, oh, wait a minute, I can take all this stuff and have like this whole musical thing, this whole recording, and just keep everything separate. And then when I come in the venue, I can just put the stuff wherever I want. You know what I mean? Like I can have I can have these instruments come from here and here and here, and then these effects happen this way. So I just think for sound specifically, like the more that you know about all of understanding sound holistically, I think the better off that you'll be. And now that we're in a downtime, it is time to explore all that stuff. You can't do sound reinforcement. There's no concerts, right? You're not miking people up for the most part. You're not mixing in the back of the house. So, get a free or really cheap digital audio workstation that you can learn about, like recording and music production. Make music, make it sound good, mix, learn how to use EQ and compression, properly. And then when it's time for the live stuff to come back, you've already kind of explored these skills inside the box, and then just take them out the box, and apply them out here.
Cool.
Awesome. I'd say probably even like to supplement that, also learn other departments as well. My background is like, I started working professionally in theater at a very, very young age, like straight out of high school. So I had no idea what I wanted to do. So I tried to do everything. And ultimately, like, didn't study theater. I studied art history because I felt like if I was going to study direction, or if I was going to study set design, I just learned what not to do, because there are all these rules. So if you don't know the rules, you can break them. But it's important to understand what other departments are doing, because then you can communicate. Because the problem, one of the biggest problems you run into in productions is clashes in communication. People don't understand what they need, how long things take, or whatever. So there's always this kind of animosity. It's like, oh, the RF people need space for the fucking microphones, and blah 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 blah. And there's always this kind of dismissiveness with between departments, because nobody knows what the others do. So I sort of approached everything as a kind of polymath. I wanted to understand what every stitcher was doing, what a technician was doing. I was a stagehand. Be a production manager, because then you understand the hell that is, stuff like that. So then you can't complain, right? Because you understand. And I find that, like, often, and that really goes towards directors, especially, because like the person that's supposed to be the most communicative in the team is often the least communicative and doesn't know what they want and doesn't know how to say it. So I think, put your fingers in every pie.
Wow, I love that about the production manager. It's really true. My first big production thing was a thing at Grand Central Station. And I remember
Wow.
thinking, oh, the lighting department, who cares? And that was always all about lights.
Yeah.
Suddenly I was like, ugh, be quiet, it's fine. There's so many bigger things. And that was a great educational moment for myself to not stress out so much. That's funny, you guys are talking about getting back to sort of the basics of, being good designers and good communicators and being observant and learning your history, art history, and, knowing your field. And it's funny, right now, I was thinking, no, at least as a lighting person, there's so much new technology out there. It's overwhelming. And I don't even know where to say, except like, if you know it all, you will be employed. Because there are going to be people like me, I'm older, and I'm not going to learn certain things. I don't want to. I want someone else to know it, and I can tap them because I don't have the time. I mean, maybe right now I have the time, but I can't even apply what I'm doing. I don't have the theater at my disposal to fool around with a bunch of movers and, or whatever, or, incorporate projection and learn how to manipulate it myself. And so for somebody who wants to remain employable or to be the most widely employable, of course, I mean, I always tell them, a good attitude and good communication, but it's really true. If you know how to handle all of these programs and all of this technology, I think that that'll take you far. Whether you're going to be doing VR, game design, live stuff, video, film. Well, there isn't really so much film anymore. It's all video. Programming, that kind of thing those are like the new tools, or those are the tools of today that I think are sort of essential. And I've even, I've been to seminars online where just being able to explain things virtually and understanding how to use all the virtual technology, just even in like Zoom meetings and stuff, is going to be the way that people communicate. When renderings, I mean, Carlos, this must happen to you all the time, where people just want to see the renderings of what you're going to be whatever the set is, in the most realistic way possible, where it's like lit. And there's so much, I don't know what to call it, VR stuff in that regard. I think you have to master that because the clients are used to seeing it. Whereas in the old days, you'd say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to create this kind of atmosphere, here's maybe a picture of it. Now they almost want to see the finished project before you even set foot in a theater. And I don't work that way, but I think it's going to become more. No, I don't like to. Also, I think it kind of, it looks a little flat and dead. Let's be real. I mean, and I'm sure they'll fix that up. But even then, everybody winds up doing the same thing because they're all in the same programs. So, if you know how to articulate what you're going to do differently, I still like to be able to turn a mistake into a golden opportunity in a space, like a programmer screwed up something in mine once and I was like, no, we're keeping that. Like they did a weird, I don't know, like everything's, like chased to like a mistake. And it wound up how we opened the show. Like you couldn't do that if you had spent hours perfecting it at home, so I guess it's a combination of like learn the technology, but keep your feet on the ground of, observation and good design and good communication. Sorry.
I think making decisions too far ahead of time it always just squashes creativity. Like when, especially like if I give a director too much sound, they're making decisions without hearing what it actually sounds like, for one, because now you're just listening in earbuds, you know what I mean? And not in a space, or not like the post-production phase of this finished surround sound thing, right? So they're making decisions based on very little information, right? Plus, like, why have tech rehearsal? Like, if it's all locked in, why do we even tech it? You know what I'm saying? I like to play around in tech rehearsal and play underscoring that you haven't heard and see how the actors react to this. So I completely agree.
I love about the tech rehearsal stuff, because that's the thing that nobody wants to pay for. There's so many people who would be like, great, we don't, I mean, this is an ongoing argument I have with a lot of companies. It's like, we have to, you know, if you doubled your tech time, especially in dance, there's no money for it in dance, but if you doubled the amount of time you had, you could create so much. But dance companies work on such a small amount of money. To them, the tech rehearsal is so expensive, and anything that they can do beforehand, they feel like they're saving money. And it's a constant battle of, no, this is the creative time. You know, you've been working on that choreography for a year. Here's my 8 hours with you. You know, like a little more time.
Yeah, it's our time to play.
Okay, all you fundraisers you know, in the end, it is the money, and maybe money will be really reallocated, you know, to allow, I mean, I'm seeing that more, you know, people are doing residencies, they're doing technical residencies. Like, that is a fantastic gift. Do you guys know Lumberyard? Do people on this? Yeah, you know, Lumberyard, like, gives you a crew and a facility, a well-equipped facility, and days of tech time. It's amazing.
It's awesome.
You know, I'm hoping that there will be more along that model. Do you guys have any questions? Rob, Jim, Ashley, Julia. Guess we're so complete. Answered everything. No questions about life in the universe.
All right. Well, I guess we'll wrap up here. So thank you so much, Kathy, Carlos, and G. Thank you all for attending. Check out more Digital Commons Festival events. I think next weekend we'll be talking with Front of House and how their lives have changed. That's going to be interesting. And yeah, thank you all for coming.
Yeah, thanks so much. You can find out more at carolinaperformingarts.org. And thank you all so much for your time and your insights. And it's just been great to have this chat. So hopefully we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.